Hello everyone, I am unapologetically Christian, and this is a video, kind of a testimony to what my life has looked like the last decade and a half, maybe. I wanted to approach this, as the title says, from Christian to cult to Christ, and I wanted to address this as kind of a walk into my testimony and what my straying from the gospel did to my life. Right off the bat, I want to say that I was born into a Christian home. We went to church sometimes, but we never had a church family. I was never in any youth ministry or anything like that. And we always bounced from weird denominations too, so Pentecostal, Baptist, non-denominational, Methodist, stuff like that. My mother was raised Catholic, and my father was Protestant. My dad never talked about God, ever. There was few moments that God would be brought up. He would give a short answer, short response, and that was it. You just had to move on. My journey in my faith, it really started probably in the early 2000s. And now when I say walk in my faith, I do not mean that I had faith. Really, I didn't. I was kind of hanging on to the faith of my mother, who has always been a very strong Christian in her own right. A woman who's always read the Bible and stuff like that. But when it came to my walk, I let outside influences determine what my faith would look like, and it led me astray. So my walk started really when I was a young man, still in my teens, and I read everything. So I would go through, and as you can see, I have a bunch of books, but I have more books. I have about 6 bookcases full of books, and that's what I did. I had a really rough upbringing. And I did not want to stay there. So anyway, while this whole thing started, I went through and I would read the Bible, but I couldn't understand it. And this is a common thing with people who truly don't have the Holy Spirit. At the time, I did not know that. So I had a general understanding of what the gospel said, but I really did not believe it. There was a lot that I questioned. I had passion for people that were in sin, and it shaped my belief that the Bible was written at a certain time, that, you know, at that time those things weren't acceptable. And I'm referring to homosexuality as one of the main topics, but other things as well, in sexuality in general, as well as dabbling in what now is being referred to as New Age. I'd been dabbling in it since the early 2000s, but I had no idea what it was. But I knew that I wanted to become something greater than I am. Anyway, in the beginning of my faith, it was kind of, I was just hanging on to my mother's faith, really. That was where it was. And I had gone through and I was reading Kabbalah. I was reading the Zohar. I was going into, obviously, I'd gone through the Bible, the Torah, the Tanakh, going through the Quran as well, because I wanted to know all that there was to know about this central faith, and what I thought at that time. It led me, by, I would say, about 2005, 2006, it led me to a place that I was angry, and confused, and I'd been very, very lonely, and I had gone to God, so I thought, and I was praying that I would find the love of my life. And the problem that I see now, that I did not see at that time, was this idea that God needed to bend to my beck and whim, and that when he didn't, I became angry at him. My faith really started to shake around 2006. I had started to get visions and started to receive dreams, which is surprising because I really didn't understand God. I didn't understand the gospel. I didn't really, whatever, and I was completely infatuated with Revelations. That was what I focused on. Excuse me. And in that time of infatuation with Revelation, I started debating people, and angrily, my whole idea was that I was going to beat them in a debate. And my topics went way off biblical sources. Eventually, it went to me, I would say honestly, attacking my mother on the Trinity, and saying that Yeshua, Jesus, was not part of the Trinity, and he was not God in the flesh. And that was part of my, my sinful walk. At the time, openly I'll say, I was actively in sin. I was physically violent with people. I was emotionally violent with people. Abusive. I also was actively going onto pornography and in sexual sin. I had a huge addiction to masturbation at that time. And part of me knew that those things were wrong, but it just made me more angry, and I was directing my anger at God and then the people around me. So my debating went from debating for the gospel, that I thought anyway, this twisted version of the gospel that I had in my mind, to debating against the gospel. And like I said, I had studied a lot of the Quran, so I had a bit of understanding about the Quran, and also about like the Hebrew mysticism that you would get in the Kabbalah and stuff like that. So around 2006, there was a breaking point, and I had stayed up all night long, it was the longest period of time that I had ever prayed. That prayer literally started around 10 p.m. and I did not stop until about 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. And I just, on my floor of my bedroom at the time, I just cried out to God because I felt like these things weren't going the way I wanted them to go. And I vividly remember at certain points I could feel what I believed to be God standing over me, but it was more like God was standing in disgust, because even though I was a self-proclaimed Christian, I was not following what God called me to do. And while I was praying, I could feel, I was face down on the carpet, by the way, I could feel that there was something very evil and sinister in the room too, and behind me. It actually scared me, like as if somebody had broken into my house and was standing behind me while I was praying for hours. That was really the night that I fell away from my faith. And I was directing my anger towards God, as I knew him anyway. And that led me to a life of even deeper sin. Eventually I ended up meeting the love of my life, and make a long story short, she is a Christian, and we moved in together, and I regret to say this is something that has haunted me since I became saved, is that I coaxed her into being intimate with me. And she was a virgin, and I took her virginity before we were married, and we moved in together, and I watched as her faith started to become shaky. But at the time I didn't care, because again, if you got in my face, you know, if you were a sidewalk minister and you got into my face, I would debate you. And I would try everything in my power to try to trip you up, to mess you up, whatever it took. So it didn't really bother me that she was losing her faith. She stopped reading her Bible, she stopped praying, and it just became a whole messy situation between me and her. We fought all the time. Our arguments would end usually with holes in walls and stuff like that. Never laid a hand on her, but there was a few times that we wanted to lay our hands on each other, and it was a very, very toxic situation. I had became an employee at a sandwich shop. This was about 2012, maybe 2011, 2012. And I slowly worked my way up to the head sandwich artist, and so I got to run the front of the line, and I was very fast, and they loved that. So one day this guy comes in, and he comes up to me and he's just like, you know, man, I don't normally do this, but I just feel like I need to introduce you to myself and tell you what me and my friend here, and he had a friend with him, are all about. I was like, okay. And so he pulls out this card and he hands me the card, and I was like, what is this? Click on video number 2, and yeah, thank you.